Hello and welcome to a special spooky edition of Episode Breakdown. Today, we're covering our very first Hellsing Ultimate Abridged, along with Celloween. As stated before, this is my first Hellsing breakdown. I know a lot of people have been very curious about the process of editing this in comparison to Dragon Ball Z, and I'll be showing the differences between the two today. I must say, however, that in terms of visual edits, this episode is actually one of the least dynamic out of all 5 that have been released so far. That being said, we still have a lot to cover here. Starting us off, one of the most complicated shots of the episode, the opening scene with these two blokes seen here. See, when we wrote this scene, we didn't realize how much panning, moving, and blurring that went on in this shot. This made the process of editing the scene and I'm using professional lingo here, giant seething dick pain. I ultimately had to settle on using the character on the left's original lip flaps, which worked out well enough, but the character on the right proved to be a much larger hassle, with his side profile and moving background. I ended up having to cut and paste his lip flaps while simultaneously erasing and redrawing background elements. Oh, and the music at the beginning? Should I Stay or Should I Go by The Clash. Yeah, British rock! One thing you'll notice with Hellsing Ultimate Abridged, especially with the Major, is that moving lip flaps are a near constant. I'm just particularly lucky that, unlike with Dragon Ball Z, the motions are usually at a smooth, consistent frame rate. Also, with the age of the anime, the occurrences of shaking footage are dramatically lower, nearly non-existent, outside of shots where the anime actually intentionally shakes the camera to make an otherwise still shot more dynamic. So this shot here, I had to edit out the Major's hand. A bit more of a bitch than you'd think given the more detailed backgrounds of Hellsing over Dragon Ball Z. Now, the war scene here is effectively the opening for this episode, eschewing the usual opening song from Andrew WK. There's a reason for this, and you shall see it later. Also, fans of Edwin Starr's War will likely notice that I spliced the song together from 2 different spots. This was partially to shorten it, as well as line up the Major's dialogue with the lyrics. And now on to Integra, that wonderful bitch. I say bitch because she smokes that goddamn cigar in almost every goddamn scene, which makes editing for her one of the biggest hassles in the series. Luckily, with the way the show animates the smoke, it's not too difficult to garbage man out. I just have to do it in almost every scene she's in. Also, Reggie from this scene is actually also Reggie from this scene.
Wait a second, then that implies that the Queen—
Interrupt my story again, Reggie! See what happens!
The scene after this was complicated for a rather embarrassing reason. When we wrote this scene with Zora and Blitz, we ended up without enough footage to work with from this episode. So I ended up pulling footage from a later episode and tried to add some subtle lighting effects to the original scenes as to help make it less apparent. Also, not sure if many people have noticed, but I use a lot of the Big O soundtrack in the series. It helps capture the gothic yet orchestral tone that I often like to take with Hellsing. As well, and this is very much on the sound design side of things, I do a lot more with body movement sound effects in Hellsing than with Dragon Ball Z. Friction from cloth, equipment rattling as it's handled or characters run. In Dragon Ball, a lot of that would come off as overproduced, but here it sounds more appropriate and immersive. Another feature in this series that I rarely get to play with in Dragon Ball that is much more prevalent in Hellsing are the incredibly detailed lip flaps. While most of them still follow the rule of 3, open, half open, closed, I often run into scenes where the lip flaps are far more realistic. I love moments like these, and I'll take any opportunity I can get to work with them. Skipping basically to the end of the episode, we find ourselves at the reintroduction of Alexander Anderson. Some people are wondering what the first bit of music that's playing when he shows up is. It's actually an instrumental orchestral version of the wrestler Sheamus' theme, Too Many Lies, which Alexander Anderson parrot quotes in his first appearance, and that plays in the background during his second. Also, I'd like to thank the hundreds of people who submitted for the Iscariot organization chant. A chosen select were able to make it. Also, the ending song here, I'm Shipping Up to Boston by Dropkick Murphys, is another reference to the Boondock Saints. Lastly, in case it wasn't apparent, the Hellsing Ultimate Abridged logo was originally not in this shot. Before I wrap this up, did you know this whole scene was the first one I worked on? And then, after that, I worked backwards through the episode? I was so excited to work on Alexander Anderson's scene first that I just couldn't help myself. And that's about it for Hellsing. I know, not a whole lot to go off of, but perhaps I'll do an episode covering 1 through 4 in the future. I don't have the original project files for them, but I could perhaps go over some behind-the-scenes details and Easter eggs. Now for Celloween. This one actually started off as part of episode 45, but it was nearly impossible to make it work with how we'd paced 44. We couldn't find a way to get Krillin to Bulma's place, then to the airport, without it coming off incredibly cliché. We also covered Goku's return in 45, and on top of that, it would have basically taken up 5 minutes of the entire episode, which is already a normal length without it. After some tough deliberation, we decided to make the scene a Halloween special, which then allowed us to make a bunch of tongue-in-cheek, wink-at-the-camera references to horror movies of the past, and be as weird and wacky with the scene as we wanted. It being Krillin's dream also allowed us a way to tie it into the main plot, which you'll see in episode 45. The opening scene stars Purple Eyes as the man with the machine gun. Every other character in this, save Takahata 101's Cell, is played by Lanny Pator. The idea being that any character with real speaking lines would be Lanny Pator's voice as he voices Krillin, and this is Krillin's dream. Speaking of those characters, if you check the description, you'll find that each character's name is also a reference. The man with the gun's name is Jackie Englund, a combination of Jackie Earl Haley and Robert Englund, the second and first actors for Freddy Krueger respectively. The anchor's name is Wes after Wes Craven, and the reporter's name is George after George Romero. The mother is named Erin after Erin Hardesty from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, and the child's name is Damien from the classic horror film The Omen. Also, here is a full list of the movies made reference to in this special. And no, Left Behind is not a horror film, but it just seemed too appropriate for the scenario. As for the composite sketch, we once again have Stefan Krosix to thank for this. He's a champ, and we really appreciate all his hard work. The picture in the solar flare? Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees Rule 34. Yep. Also, and it's a little hard to hear it, that's actually Halloween from Aqua playing in the plane. On the editing front, things don't really get all that complicated until this scene here on the plane. The logo is just a couple of text layers with After Effects wiggle effect. I then overlaid it with a stock 8mm film video. However, once Krillin is holding onto the plane, I had to utilize the rotobrush tool to erase the background and then replace it as so I could make Krillin's movements more fluid. Moving backgrounds are a bitch like that. I had to do the same with this shot on the plane, as well as overlay Cell in this shot because of the perspective of his beak moving over the background. Lastly, for this scene, I had to transplant an entire face from Krillin just to get him to wake up. And finally, the music at the end? It's from a song called Nightmare on My Street by Will Smith. It's soul-rendingly 90s. Bam! We're all done. Hopefully, I can do that behind the scenes on 1 through 4, or perhaps commentary tracks with Takahata 101. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this breakdown. Make sure to check out our gaming channel. We're doing a month of Dragon Ball Z game Let's Plays. We've also got a bunch of other fun ones coming out, and your support helps make DBZA happen. Stay golden, folks, and I'll see you next time.